Up to this point in the course, I showed you how to create what could be considered a read-only site, meaning users are not actually sending the application any data of their own. This is not a very realistic view of the world of web applications, in which the only sites that are truly read-only are sites such as online newspapers, and even they usually have a comment section. In this chapter, I'll show you how to interact with the users of your site by allowing them to send data to your site, mostly through the use of HTTP form posts. Since the demo application we're building is an online auction site, one of the core bits of functionality this site will need is the ability for users to place their own items up for auction. This means that we'll need to provide them with some way of getting that information to us, and most often that way is through an HTML form that produces an HTTP form post to the server. To implement an HTML form, let's first create a new action in the auctions controller named create. For now, we'll just have this action return its default view. Then we can use the Add View wizard to create a strongly typed edit view. To do this, select the Create a Strongly Typed View, just as we've done before, and choose the Auction Model class. This time, instead of the list or empty templates that you've seen before, choose the Create template, which will tell Visual Studio to generate an HTML form that users can populate with auction data. When you're ready, go ahead and click Add to create the view. Once Visual Studio is done, take a look at what it has generated. Here, Visual Studio has generated an HTML.BeginFormHelper method call and placed it inside of a using statement. This helper creates the HTML form tag that enables the browser to post the contents of the form to an action on our site. Notice that the end of line 10 is an opening bracket that indicates the beginning of a code block that spans multiple lines. Then scroll down to line 75 to find the closing bracket. This means that when the view executes, everything within these two brackets will be rendered inside of the HTML form tag that was started on line 10. Scroll back up through the contents of the form to see that Visual Studio has inspected our model and generated a form field for each of its properties. The generated code uses the HTML.LabelFor helper to create a label for each property, the field's display name that will be shown to the user, and the HTML.EditorFor helper to generate the appropriate HTML markup for each property. The HTML.LabelFor and HTML.EditorFor helpers inspect each property almost exactly like the HTML.DisplayNameFor and HTML.DisplayFor helpers that I showed in Chapter 3. Using all the information they can find to determine the best way to render the label and corresponding form field. We won't be using them now, but you should be aware that, in addition to these two helpers, ASP.NET MVC provides a bunch more helpers such as the text area for, checkbox for, drop-down list for, hidden for, and password for helpers, among others, that you can call on to generate specific kinds of HTML form fields should you need them. With this view in place, run the site and navigate to the Create action to see what these helpers actually generate. Just like the HTML we generated back in Chapter 3, these helpers don't currently have much information to work with. So for now they are going to generate the most basic things possible, a simple label and a text input field for each property. Clearly, this is not fitting for every type of data that we're going to be requesting. Don't worry though, we'll be giving the helpers the information they need to generate more suitable HTML in just a few more videos. By default, the HTML begin form helper renders a form tag that posts the form data to the same action that rendered the view. In this case, that's the create action on the auctions controller. That means that if we put a breakpoint in the create action and then run our site and post the form, we should be able to see the form values that are posted. So enter some values and post the form. Then inspect the request.form property in the debugger to see that those values were in fact sent to the server. Congratulations, you've just successfully posted data to your application. Before we move on to the next video, there's something that is bugging me about our form that I'd like to change. I'd like to add a category property to our auction model. Adding the category property to our model is simple. Simply add a new string property named category. Then we'll need to add the field to our form. We could copy the markup that Visual Studio generated for our other properties. However, since it's a string value, The HTML Editor for helper will generate a simple text box for this property. This means that users would be able to provide whatever category name they like, but that's not what we want. We want to be able to control the categories on our site, which means giving users a predetermined list of categories that they can select from, rather than entering their own. To do this, we'll use one of those HTML form helpers I mentioned earlier in the video, the drop-down list for helper. The drop-down list for helper is kind of different from the other form helpers. Not only does it work with a selected value that it can get from the model, it also needs a list of possible values to display to the user so that they can select one. We can give the drop-down list for helper what it needs by passing it a collection of select list items in the form of a select list object, like so. Now when we run the page, the first field is our new category field, which displays a drop-down of category options that we defined in the select list. There is a bit of an issue here, though. Some may argue that creating that list of categories in the view like that breaks the separation of concerns principle. In other words, it's really the controller's job to generate data such as this list. To fix this potential issue, simply cut the select list from the view and paste it into the controller. Then, use the view bag to send it to the view, just like I showed you how to do in Chapter 3. Notice that because the drop-down list for helper does not play very well with dynamic values such as those in the view bag, we'll have to explicitly cast it to a select list object. Then compile the site and refresh the page to see that everything is still working as it should. In this video, I showed you how to quickly and easily create HTML forms and post the data from those forms to your server. In the next video, I'll show you how ASP.NET MVC makes it very easy to extract values from that posted data using perhaps its most powerful feature, a feature called model binding.